Okay, so in this video, things are going to start getting very interesting. Previously, we learned how to accept user input using the read line method, right? So now let's make some decisions based on that input and change how our program executes based on the input of a user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type some code. I'm not going to tell you what it means. I just want you to read it and to think about it and think to yourself, what do you think is going to be the outcome of this? So let's go ahead and just select all of our code from previous examples. And let's start over. I'm just going to start typing and then I'll pause and we'll talk about it a little bit. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen? Did you guess if the user types in 1, then we'll print something out to the console window? What happens if they don't press the number 1? If they push some random character like A or 3 or whatever the case might be, what do you think will happen? Well, let's do one more line of code here before we test this out for ourselves. And let's let her rip. Here we go. Would you prefer what is behind door number 1, 2, or 3? I'm going to push 1. And it says you want a new car. Awesome. All right, let's do this again. This time, let's do something different. Let's type in the number 2. And nothing seems to happen. Okay, so if you guessed that, you're correct. All we did was introduce an if statement. An if statement tests a condition to see if it's true. If the condition is true, if user value equals the string 1, then execute everything in this code block. Again, our curly braces represent a code block. So everything in this code block belongs to this conditional statement. If that's true, then execute it. Make sense? Okay, so let's move on. Let's expand this example out just a little bit. So I'm going to keep on working at it, and you can, again, read this C# code for yourself just to impress upon you how easy it is to read the code, even if you've never read a line of it before in your life. Okie dokie. So here we are. What do you think will happen now? We've added else conditions. So if this is true, then execute this code block. But if that's not true, then we're going to move on to another condition. Is this true? If it is, then execute that code block. If that's not true, well then, is this true? If it is, then execute this code block. If none of those conditions are true, then write this message to screen. So let's run it a couple times and see an exercise and see what happens. All right, so we already ran 1. Let's run 2. Awesome. Let's run it a third time. We'll hit 3. Makes sense? Sure it does. It executed a different line of code. It ignored the other two sections of code. It ignored everything in these code blocks. Why? Because those conditions weren't true. Okay, and then finally, let's exercise that last condition. 1, 2, or 3, let's use the letter A. Sorry, we didn't understand, you lose. Okay, so great. So the moral of the story is this. This is the basic format for a conditional statement, an if statement. There will be another conditional statement we'll look at tomorrow. It tests a condition. If this condition equates to true, if user value indeed is the number 1, then execute this code block below it. And we did that several times, including an else statement. Finally, or I'm sorry, an else if statement, and then finally just an else statement to capture every other condition or possibility that could happen. All right, so one other thing before we move away from this, what I probably want to do here, in this case, to trim up and make it a little less verbose, instead of having these console.write lines everywhere, what I might do is this. And this is a process called refactoring. Looking at your code, changing some things about its readability or how it, not necessarily how it functions, but how it appears and its structure. It's a term called refactoring, and we'll visit this much later on and getting into more about what is refactorings and the different refactorings and some tools that are built in to the Visual Studio IDE to help you do that, and some third-party tools that make changing up your code a snap. In this case, we're just going to rewrite some code to simplify it. We don't want to waste any characters if we don't have to, so you should start thinking along these lines. So I'm going to call this string message. Notice the lowercase m in message, and then I'm going to initialize it to an empty string. Don't have to do that, but I feel better about that already. Okay, then we're going to remove these console.write lines. And then since we have a read line at the very bottom of this statement, we'll move that there. All right, so let's do this again. Right line, and here's the magic. We're just going to print out whatever's in that variable. Easy as that, right? So let's run it and see if we get the same results. What do you prefer? 1, 2, 3. Let's just go with 2. You wanted to vote. Awesome. Okay, so it still works. All right. So the other thing that I would probably say is this: if you only have one statement in the code block, you can skip the curly braces. Now, some people do this anyway, just because they like the convention of continuing to use the curly braces regardless. I'm just showing you that you don't have to. If it's just one line of code. Now, if there's multiple lines of code, this isn't going to work. So if we had in here console.readLine, you'll notice this. We'll get an error here. It'll say, "Whoa, what are you doing?" It's an invalid expression, else, and you'll focus all your time on the else statement, but really the problem is you are missing the curly braces for the code block. Okay, now it works. All right, so let's remove all this and push 3, and you want a new cat. Awesome, it works. Okay, so you need to memorize this syntax. It needs to be as familiar to you as typing any combination of words that make up a sentence in the English language. You'll only memorize it if you get your hands into the code and write a lot. Also, some flashcards will help you memorize the basic format. And that's exactly what we're building towards. Watch the next couple of videos and you'll see what I mean. And hopefully those will help you to memorize some of these concepts before we get into day 2. Okay, so got a couple of closing comments, an exercise, and some homework to get through. And we'll have completed day 1. And you're already well on your way to learning C#. See how easy it is? Most of it is intuitive. It just makes sense and it reads right once you get some of the basics under your belt. So good work. We'll see you in the next video. Thank you.